Hi, and welcome to our first ever virtual summit. I'm Stephanie Wade, co-founder of ChangeNerd. And this session is brought to you by ChangeNerd Learn, where you can continuously upskill your team with certification programs, next level practices, and tools with our online learning platform. And it's also brought to you by ChangeNerd Gigs, where you can hire top freelance change management professionals to supplement your current transformation efforts. To learn more, hop onto changenerd.com. Enjoy this session.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this episode of our virtual summit. We're connected with Euan. We're going to talk about, building your change analytic capability. So change analytics is very popular right now, especially because everyone is working virtual. Data and managing data is very critical right now as well. So Euan, I'm so happy to have you on our virtual summit. So thank you for making time for this.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, Euan, we know that you are an experienced change management practitioner. You're also you've also created your own software, the Change Compass, which is software for
That's
change
right.
management. So you are you're the right person to talk to when it comes to change analytics. But before we get into the conversation, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so Brian, I started the Change Compass around 5 years ago. So currently we're working with our clients, on change data and extracting the value from that. And prior to that, I was working all over the world. So I was working for Intel, Motorola. When I came back to Australia, I was working for National Australia Bank, and I've been doing some work with IAG, Insurance Australia Group as well. And so for the longest time, I've been a change practitioner, either in the consulting capacity or in-house.
Awesome. And you are in Australia, right?
Right, yeah. In Sydney, Australia, the sun's just starting to shine, so that's really great to see.
Man, thank you so much for being a part of this. This is awesome that we can have these global conversations right here on Zoom. So this is really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into it with the change analytics and things of that nature. As you know, we're all working virtual. Um, you know, do you believe that knowing about analytics or understanding analytics is critical now for change practitioners? Do you think that that's the way that we need to move as an industry?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. I think, with the way the world is moving towards within business and organizations, we know that when we look across all of the various functions that we work with, whether it's marketing or HR or any of the other operational business units, data is absolutely key to everything they do, and even more so as we progress, right? And definitely in the post-COVID world, where we're not going to be next to someone. A lot of things will still be quite virtual, or a combination of face-to-face versus virtual.
Hmm.
So how we use data is really going to determine our success in the future for us as change practitioners. I know a lot of us are very, focused on us being, you know, focused on feelings and how people respond and people, right? We're people centric. But there's a lot of valuable data that we could really add in how we drive change in that context.
Yeah, I do believe so. I think that the organizations that we serve, they want more. They want more. I think that today's change management practitioner, they need to speak the business language. They need to, right? They
Absolutely.
need to speak the language of business, and the language of business, a part of that language is data. Um,
Absolutely.
and so
Yeah.
it's people data, but it's other it's data from other sources as well. So I agree with you, but I'll also say I think this is new. For our
Yeah.
industry, using data. We have the change curve, but I don't. For the last couple of decades, we haven't really associated hardcore numbers with that curve.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
think right because I think we spent probably the last 10 years getting leaders and organizations to understand what the change curve is. right?
Absolutely.
And being willing to make the investment in change management. So now that organizations are, they understand what change management is, they understand the value prop. I think it's now time for us to level up and incorporate some data into it.
Right, absolutely. In fact, when you look at the change curve, right, I know like McKinsey has done quite a lot of research in this area, and they've actually found that, typically what we think of the curve as in, there's this dip after the go live and down into the valley of despair, right? So,
Yeah.
and then it gradually comes up. But in fact, McKinsey has found that with well planned and effectively structured change programs that actually don't go through the valley of despair. And I think, a lot of us have been through changes where it's actually really well handled and you don't get that dip. So it just proves that that model isn't always correct, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, man. Absolutely right. Related to change analytics, what's involved? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of different components when it comes to change data, right? So I guess we at the Change Campus look at it at three different levels. We've got the project level, we've got the business level, and we've got the enterprise level. So let's look at the project level. So this is the part that we're really familiar with when we do change projects. So it's things like your change complexity assessment, your change readiness assessment, training completion rates, email open rates or site visits to your internet pages, all that sort of stuff are things that we're used to. And those are really critical, right? Because that's how you present the progress that one project is making within that project level. But then when you roll up to the business level, it's things like, how do you measure the maturity of that, change maturity of that business? Um, what's the sponsor readiness for your program or for often a sponsor could be a sponsor for more projects as well. So what's the readiness for that sponsor? And then, there's across that business that you're working with, what's the change leadership capability? So how do you measure that? And what's your assessment of their change leadership capability? And of course, the change capacity as well. What's their capacity for change? And within certain parts of the business that you're dealing with, what's their change saturation line? Are you able to work with them to understand what that line looks like and where that is in terms of their change capacity? And then if you go to the enterprise level, it's looking at things such as, the whole portfolio of projects, right? And what's the overall risk when you lay it across a lot of the different projects. For example, if you plot, we have a chart that plots the readiness for change that you've already collected across the different projects. And we map that against the impact size of each of the projects. So naturally, you'd be thinking, okay, so if these projects are very large impacts and the readiness scores are not quite there, that's probably the risky quadrant that we want to focus on. So that's probably one way to look at it. And then, of course, you could look at the change maturity across the enterprise and the capability levels as well. So these are some of the ways in which we can look at analytics across the board.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Whenever I'm supporting projects, and you're talking to executives, and you got the project team there. I'm always pushing the focus. Just pushing simplicity and focus, right? So I love what you're talking about, because the data is all over, right? But I think you have to focus in on a particular area. So oftentimes when organization is managing multiple projects, it's easy to get distracted, right? It's easy. Things, that's why I think it's so important to create these integrated stories or integrated narratives that help end users understand within the context of their role. They can understand all of these. So you may have a technology project over here, you may have an org design project over here, you may have another, I don't know, a HR performance project. There's a lot going on, but to an end user, you have to be able to tell that story. But as a project team or an OCM person, you need to be able to target and say, okay, we have all of this going on. What problem do we really need to solve? Right? Like where's the riskiest component? Okay, right? And so, and then you hone in that particular area. And then, based on what you're saying, identify the right data elements so that you can be somewhat proactive and understand readiness and capacity for change. And now you can add value that way.
Absolutely. And so I think you're right in the sense that you want to be very focused when you talk to your senior leaders around, some of the key drivers using data. You kind of ideally you would have a set of different data that you monitor. So through the data you're capturing, you're able to picture to get together what is that story that's starting to emerge, and therefore what are the elements that you're going to select out when you do the reporting to highlight some of the key challenges and some of the key risks. So you could really use that to make decisions, working with the stakeholders. And so I think that's the part that you're thinking around, which is, that simplicity of plugging the right parts of the story and the right data to support your recommendations. So absolutely. And I think that's a really good segue into kind of what we're really talking about here, which is around how do we really, drive that, change analytics capability through that systems thinking. So if you're working with a set of stakeholders, you need to think beyond just what your project's about, right? So when you apply that systems thinking, you're actually thinking through what's the overall system that they're actually going to go through. What is that change landscape? Within that change landscape, what are the different change elements, and what are those aspects that's going to shape their experience when they go through that whole time period, right? And so that's really what we're talking about in terms of systems thinking. So applying that lens versus the, just the project that you're working with, which is a fairly siloed lens, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like when you were speaking. I love that you connected understanding the context of what's happening around you, but also considering the experience that the stakeholders or the end users are going to go through. Yeah, I like that. I know that you and the Change Compass team. I know you have an infographic that describes the 7 components of building change analytic capability. Walk us through those 7 components.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, Brian. And so when we think about change analytics, often those probably maybe a little bit early in that journey. They're thinking, oh great, I've got data, so naturally I'm able to then use that to influence the business and drive outcomes. But there's actually quite a few steps involved, because data is data. Data isn't insight. Data isn't decision making or actioning. So there are quite a few of those steps. So we've got 7 components that we think about in terms of driving that, the end outcome, and really build that overall change analytics capability. So I'll walk through each of them.
Yeah.
The first part is really around extracting the data and capturing the data. So be very clear around what we talked about before, those critical data elements that you want to be capturing. How do you capture it? Where does the data come from? Who governs that data? How do you know that data is accurate and it's up to date? And how do you establish the routine so you're constantly getting the right data? So that's probably the first part, right? The data capturing part. And so the second part is really around, and this is really critical, your sponsorship and leadership. Because, as good change practitioners, we know that having good sponsorship is really critical. And that really applies in the change analytics space as well, because you need your sponsor, you need your managers and leaders to be understanding and driving the fact that this is going to be critical to the success of the program or the company, right? So you need them to reinforce, to support and invest in this capability. It doesn't need to be like a huge exercise. You could start from a very, very small base, right? So maybe working with one part of the business, or collect a set of data for one project, and then you go with that. So that's really the sponsorship and leadership part. The third part is really around talent and organization. So by that, what I mean is, how do you ensure you've got the right skills and the right roles and responsibilities to support the analysis and the reporting of data? So someone needs to do that, right? It doesn't just come from nowhere.
I love
So how
it.
do you gradually build some of those routines and skills? And then you need to develop them. So the fourth aspect is around capability development. So how do we continually exercise, develop the skills of those involved to know how to interpret the data, to know how to generate those insights, and to be able to look at the whole story, not just the actual data points.
Mhm.
And then the fifth element is the insight generation. So now that you've got all the wonderful data, you've got your leaders supporting you, you've got all the great routines to, constantly, challenge and update the skills of those involved. You're starting now to generate those insights. So what you're doing is actually you're having great conversations, you're looking at the data, you're segmenting the data, you're pulling out things left, right, and center, you're looking broadly at change data versus business data, and doing different cuts to really understand what is this picture telling me. And then after that, it's insight application. So great, I've just had a wow moment that, the story is this. And therefore, I'm thinking this is going to really help me to make some recommendations. So how do I make those recommendations? What forum did I apply that in? Who do I need to influence? That's really the application stage. Is there a typical governance session that I can actually go to drive decision making?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then the last part is really about tracking your value realization or capturing those value, because naturally, if you've got sponsors sponsoring something, which is your change capability, you want to be regularly reporting back to say that, okay, this is the value you've achieved, this is the value you're getting out of this, out of the investment in the time and effort we're putting to focusing on change capability in the analytics component. So that's really that portion.
Yeah. Yeah. Euan, we hear change analytic capability, right? And it sounds excellent, just rolling off your tongue, right? But thank you for the way you just broke that down. That I think the way you explained it is the most practical approach I've heard someone kind of articulate it. So thank you for that. And your infographic is helpful. We'll be sure to share that with the community. That's really good. Ewan, how can what's the number one step? What's the first step that an OCM practitioner can take to really upskill themselves? Because a lot of us, to include myself, have a ProSci certification, right? Which is, I think, is like the 101 version. Um, you know, Incorporating data analytics into our work, again, it's new for a lot of people, right? So for practitioners who want to jump into incorporating more data into their work, what's the first thing that you would recommend?
Great question, Brian. So I think the first thing I would recommend is to really understand what are the data that you're working with that's going to make the most impact for you,
Hmm.
whichever role you're taking. Like, for example, a lot of us working in change projects, I would say the first thing you want to really get your arms around is what are the pieces of change impact data you could start to build and start to focus on. Because the impact of change is really the what of the change, right? So when you have the what of the change, you're able to then use it and actually apply that in a lot of different contexts.
Hmm.
And so the what of the change includes things like, measuring the size of the change impact, who it's going to impact, what are the different audience groups that are impacted, what time, um, through what activities, is it a training session that you're running, is it a town hall? So look at those elements, because all of those elements we work with, in all of the projects that we're in, right? And start to think through, how do you plot that in terms of data points?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a bar chart? Is it a bubble chart? Or start to work with that, because those are quite, basic data points I could easily work with, right? So start with that, and then think through, okay, now that I've got that and I know how to capture those data points, how do I then build in the right routines within my project or within my business unit? Is it as simple as just leveraging the monthly planning session that the operational guys have? Or is it the monthly progress update meeting that we have, in which I can showcase my data?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just start with small steps.
Awesome. Euan, thank you. You did exactly what I knew you would do. That's why I wanted you to come in and speak at the virtual summit, man. Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of your time as well. So Euan, we know that you and the team have created software for change management.
Right.
What's your company website?
Yeah, so those of you who are interested, you can go to thechangecompass.com. Have a look around. We have lots of articles in the Knowledge Center. And if you'd like to, feel free to, you can do the free trial for 4 weeks as well. But as I mentioned, in the Knowledge Center, there's loads of articles. So there's, as what Brian called out, we have a lot of articles around change data, change, capability, et cetera, et cetera. So feel free to browse around.
Yep. Yeah. And then there's also some really great articles on portfolio change management on the Change Compass website as well. So Euan, thank you so much again for all your support with ChangeNerd, and have a great rest of the day.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
All right.
Appreciate it.